I'm sure you'll agree we've had two excellent speeches tonight. We're very privileged to have both these gentlemen with us. We're also very privileged for you to be able to ask some questions. What I would ask is, if you do have a question, please, can you say who you are and which organisation, if you're of an organisation, you represent? And can you please ask a question and make it short as possible, because I'm sure there'll be quite a few. We have two young ladies going round with microphones. Elizabeth over here and Bruno over there. Okay, can you put your hands up so I can see? Okay, should we have the gentleman in the middle there, please?
Stavros Poliviou for Dr. Coufoudakis. You said that the bicommunal solution would be unprecedented. So, from what I can see, it's any solution proposal for Cyprus would be unprecedented. But could you give us an example of two federal countries which have the exact same functionality of the federation? And the second question, in theory, we would all prefer a non-federal democracy. But in 1974, or after Makarios was overthrown, we gave Turkey a chance to illegally invade. Do you think that abandoning the UN-approved Bizonal bicommunal solution and our over 35-year-old governmental policy would give a reason for a final division? And do you think that this might not be real politics? And for Dr. Kyriakides, one question.
Should we let Professor Coufoudakis answer those questions first, please?
Yeah.
Okay.
Perhaps we can take several questions to simplify the process, and then we can comment more.
Okay, should we have,
So for Dr. Kyriakides, a solution has to be accepted also both by the Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots, right? You have condemned bicommunal programs, but these activities, from my personal experience, can certainly help one understand how people of the other community think. Do you have any suggestion that would be acceptable by the Turkish Cypriots and would make them feel they have the same chances in a united Cyprus and I'm saying a united Cyprus and not in a really multicultural country such as the United Kingdom?
Okay, let's take those questions now, please. Professor Coufoudakis.
If I caught your question correctly, you're talking about why is it unprecedented? Well, it's unprecedented because there is no other constitutional system that reflects the values that were incorporated in the Annan Plan or in the versions that we've had since the time of Mr. Christofias and his round of negotiations. So the model they're putting on the table has nothing that is similar in the rest of Europe or in the rest of the democratic world. During the course of the 1980s, Mr. Denktash realized that, perhaps we can find some points from the Belgian constitution, from the Swiss constitution, things like that. These are flawed ideas because it's like reading Marx and finding one particular line and saying, oh, that's a wonderful concept, we'll incorporate that. It was a cut and paste job that happened. Switzerland, Belgium, and their current constitutions and their current problems are the product of historical experience. It was not a cut and paste job where we found references to communalism or to linguistic separatism and things like that and say that these systems do work today. So that's part of the unprecedented comment that I've made. Federation, if you look at federal systems, be they in Germany, in Brazil, in the United States, in Canada, in Australia, central law, federal law prevails. In none of the models that have been put on the table, federal law literally prevails over anything. It's the two states that govern. And therefore, that's the typical characteristic of a confederation. The United States started off as a confederation, and because the system failed, they went back to Philadelphia several years later, and we in the US today live under the constitution we have, which is a true federal constitution. So I don't know if I missed anything else.
I think the other part of the question, I think, was if you abandon this zonal bicommunal, and after I think 35 years of the Republic of Cyprus government pursuing this sort of solution, what is
the solution is going to be one where you can revamp the 1960 constitution, bring it up to date, bring it in conformity with the European Convention on Human Rights and all the legislation of the European Union, because, after all, the true native Turkish Cypriots and the Greek Cypriots are now citizens of the EU. And I want to stress the word the true Turkish Cypriots, not the settlers that have come from Anatolia. So therefore, what both sides ought to be looking at is a revision of the Constitution of 1960 to bring it to conformity with democratic norms and to bring it in conformity with European law and the European Convention.
Thank you. The final question was to Klearchos. It was to do with the bicommunal approach and what comfort could be given to the Turkish Cypriots.
Yes, before I just address that question, a very quick footnote to what's been said about federations. When they came up with this idea of bizonal federalism in the 70s after the invasion, federalism was regarded as a relatively successful constitutional model. Since then, we've seen one federation after another come crashing down. I can think of four off the top of my head: the USSR, Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, and Sudan, I think, is the latest that's gone. And even in this country, look at this country. This country is not a federation, but we decided to devolve power from Westminster to Edinburgh. So we transferred power on a devolved basis, short of full federation. And look where it's left us 10 years later. The Scots have, Scottish nationalists have seized power in Scotland legally, and they are legally going about a process which they hope will result in the partition of this country. So it's very dangerous to take power away from central governments and transfer it to the regions. And that's especially the case in small territories. That's the footnote. I mean, the other thing I wanted to say is this is why it's dangerous to refer to the partnership of two communities. As Mr. Frangeskides will know, the first principle of a partnership is that it's an association of people who want to come together, but they will only stay together as a partnership for as long as they want to stay together. And that's why I don't understand why President Christofias put his signature to a document which had the word partnership in. Did he have any legal advisors advise him on constitutional, European Union, public international law matters before he signed that document? On the substance of the gentleman's question, I have no objection to programmes which are open to all citizens, and indeed all lawful residents, irrespective of background. The problem that we've had with the bicommunal programmes is they've entrenched the intellectual partition of the Republic of Cyprus. And what they've done is they've produced a problem which is not going to be felt today, but may be felt in the next 5 or 10 years. Look at this country. Before we had this multi-ethnic society that we're now benefiting from, we went through the Notting Hill riots of the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. We had I remember the Toxteth riots in the early 80s. Now, before our migrant communities felt fully at home, there was a great deal of racism displayed towards them. And it wasn't just direct racism, it was indirect racism. And these bicommunal projects are by their very nature racist, because they are excluding by their terminology anybody who is not a Greek Cypriot and not a Turkish Cypriot. You asked for some suggestions as to how the Turkish Cypriot citizens of the Republic could feel at home. Very good question. I would offer two suggestions off the top of my head, although one is one that I've argued about before. There needs to be a fully functioning campaign of public education, so that people in the Republic of Cyprus are aware of the history of their own continent, Europe, so that they are aware of the civil rights struggle in the United States, so that they are aware of what democracy and the rule of law means, so that they are aware of their rights as citizens. Can I just take a straw poll here? Can you put your hands up if you watch RIC or any of the other Cyprus broadcasting services on a reasonably regular basis? Keep your hands up if you've seen a documentary about the Holocaust. Put your hand up. Very good. Put your hands up if you've seen a documentary about the civil rights movement in America. On RIC. On RIC. On RIC. Have you seen anything about the Holocaust? On RIC? They may show but it's not as prevalent as it is here. We are brought up every week. There's a program on the radio and television about the Holocaust, about the civil rights movement, about the principles that we hold dear. In Cyprus, and I watch Greek and Cyprus television all of the time, I don't sit the public broadcast. So my point, the gentleman's raised a very important point. Public education is one way, and the other way is if you read the Ombudsman reports from Cyprus, he or she makes the point that many Turkish Cypriots feel uncomfortable going to public offices of the Republic where there are no services in Turkish, the Turkish language. I don't know the details of that, but I have no objection to the opening of Turkish language services in the public sector of the Republic of Cyprus, or at least English services. I'm speaking off the record there. I don't know enough about the subject. But you raise a valid point, sir.
Further questions, please. The gentleman over there, in the corner.
From the Cyprus News Agency. A quick question for both of you. If you can describe a comprehensive course of action, political, diplomatic, that will achieve a solution that doesn't include a federal state.
Can you propose a solution to a comprehensive approach to the Cyprus issue that doesn't include a bizonal, bicommunal federal?
The solution.
The way to achieve as you said, based on the 1960 revamping, how would you do it if you were the President of the Republic of Cyprus?
That's what I would put on the table the next time Mr. Downer calls on the parties in quotation marks to get together to talk about resolving the Cyprus problem. There is a constitution. Turkey said it wanted to intervene in 1974 to bring back the existing constitutional order that had been affected by the invasion. By the coup d'etat against the government of President Kyriakides. Now, there is a constitution, the constitution remains valid. Do the proper amendments to which actually the Turkish Cypriots had agreed to in 1972, in the talks 72-74, bring a modern constitution of Cyprus with the stuff that I talked to you about before. Laws that comply and conform to European standards.
I've just put that map up from Europe because it struck me this morning that David Cameron has now called for a referendum, hasn't he? With a view to us voting as whether or not to stay in the European Union. But in the meantime, he will try and negotiate an agreement with the rest of the European Union so that the United Kingdom can have a better ride, as it were. That's provoked an interesting reaction. This morning in the Times, Lord Owen, David Owen, the former Foreign Secretary of this country, stated that Mr. Cameron's position is an example of British exceptionalism. And what the Cyprus negotiations are is an attempt to produce a Cypriot exceptionalism within the European Union. But I was more struck by the French Foreign Minister's reaction to Mr. Cameron's remarks. The French Foreign Minister said that the European Union is a club in which, or it's like a club in which everybody plays football with a round ball. So what the British are trying to do is to stay within the club but play rugby with an oval ball. And that's exactly what they're trying to do in Cyprus. If you have a look at that map, though, Look at the islands that are on display. Crete is in enosis with Greece, so enosis is off the cards, especially now that Greece is bankrupt. Sicily is in enosis with Italy, Corsica with France, and the Balearics, what they call the ones off Spain, are in enosis with Spain. So that constitutional model is out. The other constitutional model is Ireland. Not a very good model to adopt. It's been partitioned. The United Kingdom could be on the verge of partition now with the Scots. So that's not a good model. But there are two islands which are sovereign states. One is Iceland. It's a multi-ethnic democracy under the rule of law, and it's unitary. And the other one's in the Mediterranean. It's called Malta, a multi-ethnic democracy under the rule of law. Alexander the Great was confronted with a Gordian knot, and he sliced it in one fell swoop. Well, I don't think we should go back to bizonalism and bicommunalism. We should put them into the coffin together with Jimmy Savile and everything else that was popular in the 1970s. Use Malta and use Iceland as our constitutional models.
Thank you. That reminds me of something that Alexander Downer said to us at the House of Parliament last year. We at Lobby, as you can see, we don't shirk from discussing the core issues openly and freely and debating them. And Theo Theodoro, our coordinator, who's not here tonight, he's in Nigeria on business, confronted Mr. Downer and basically made a lot of these points that our eminent speakers have made tonight about the defects in this approach. And Mr. Downer's response effectively was, don't be silly, that's not realistic. Turkey won't agree to that. So that's the mentality of what we're dealing with, and why we have to listen to people like this panel and try and find another way of making the UN, our own people, understand this isn't going to work.
Can I just on that point? Martin Luther King was told, "You're living in a dreamland. The southern states, the governors in the southern states won't accept this. You're living in a dream world." And the lesson of Martin Luther King is stick to your principles, stand up for law and justice, and do not succumb to political pressure.
But it was just quite nice the way he said Turkey will never accept that. Just going on from something Professor Coufoudakis said about Downer being from Adelaide. He's now a true UN diplomat. Can I have the gentleman here has been having his hand up quite some time over here in the corner? Can you use the microphone, please?
Yeah, Andreas Gaffori, my parents are both from Yalusa, and I just want to clarify something. Am I right in assuming that the argument against bizonal and bizonism, bicommunism in Cyprus, the argument against it based just on because of the multi-ethnicities in Cyprus now, that's only a minor point, isn't it? Because if we had no other ethnicities apart from only Greeks and only Turks, then we obviously wouldn't be advocating it's okay because we've only got two communities, Greek and Turk, therefore it's okay. That's not, that's correct, is it?
Yes,
we're against it as an ethical, moral and legal thing, even with only two communities, isn't that right?
That's right.
Thank you very much.
It's an opportunity for me to just make a point.
That's all right. And it's quite interesting to hear about some of the points that Klearchos made, including his comments about Kissinger adopting some of the Nazi Germany's approach to Bizonality. I thought that's quite interesting, and would be appreciated, no doubt, by Kissinger being a realpolitik supporter. Should we just carry on? Can I have Mr. Kanoukias, former coordinator of Lobby for Cyprus?
Thank you very much, Costas. Thank you to the panellists for excellent presentations. It's pretty obvious that if you carry on doing the same things in the same way, having the same arguments, you're going to achieve exactly the same results, nothing will change. So my question is this: why are we scared of actually changing matters? What is to stop us, and this is a rhetorical question perhaps, calling a meeting with the UN, with the Turks, coming along and saying, you know, boys, we've been doing this for the last 37 years. You've not achieved anything. We've had the same arguments. Bizonality cannot work. Bicommunalism cannot work. Go through each of the agreements, each of the plans, explain why they haven't worked, put forward some of the arguments we've heard this evening, and say, you know what? Let's tear this all up. Let's forget it. No, forget bizonality, forget bicommunalism. Here's a piece of paper with some proposals from us as to how we can take things forward. But by the way, they're based on the rule of law, EU norms, UN Security Council resolutions, EU freedom of movement provisions. Please explain to us why these principles cannot now form the basis of discussion. Now, what will happen? Are we scared that they will say, well, this is ridiculous, forget it, you can't now change the plans? Is everyone going to suddenly turn around and recognise the so-called TRNC? I've had many meetings at the Foreign Office, and the one thing that's pretty clear to me is the British do not want to recognise the Turks. So what is to stop us from tearing everything up, telling them to sod off, bizonality is not here, we're not going to accept it, this is what we're going to negotiate on? What do we lose?
You know, this is why I talk to you about the mistakes that have been done in the negotiating process on the part of the authorities in the government of Cyprus over the last 30 plus, almost 40 years. We always waited for somebody else to come to solve the Cyprus problem for us, and then simply say, no, the model you're putting on the table is unacceptable. This is why I came back to you today and I said to you, go back to the principle of the zero-based negotiations and put on the table a workable model for a Cyprus that belongs to the 21st century in the European Union. And you can do that by taking the constitution that exists, revamping it, amending it, bringing it up to date to conform with current standards, legal standards and political standards. So returning to a zero base, there's nothing wrong with that. It just takes a little bit of political courage and say that it has not worked. The systems that you guys have put on the table are unacceptable for the following reasons. Here is an alternative model. And take the initiative. Don't wait for the apomechanies theos, deus ex machina, to come down to present a model that we're going to say later on we don't agree to it.
Can I just first of all respond to the gentleman's very telling point? It gives me an opportunity to say something I didn't have time to draw attention to. I looked up the definition of communalism in the Oxford English Dictionary, and it includes the following sentence. Communalism, which is of course what bicommunalism flows from, communalism entails allegiance to one's own ethnic group rather than to the wider society. That takes you to the very basis of what's wrong with this constitutional concept. There was an article written, a book rather, written by Curtis F. Jones, a retired American diplomat, entitled Divide and Perish, The Geopolitics of the Middle East. And he argues in his book that communalism, which is a legacy of Ottomanism, is one of the factors behind the conflicts that drive the Middle East. And he comments, in the geopolitical evolution of the Middle East, exclusivist policies have prevailed. Most of its inhabitants are afflicted by inclines them to pay ultimate loyalty, not to their class or political party or to the state, but to their ethnic in-group. And he adds dolefully, this affliction has exacted a dreadful toll in political discord, in vulnerability to foreign exploitation, in ethnic cleansing, and in a dreary concatenation of inconclusive wars. Inconclusive wars. And he has Cyprus in mind. This communalism, it's just inherently defective, and it should be consigned to history. And the other point I wanted to make was about Mr. Gounoubbias's point, Mr. Gounoubbias's observation. I have a feeling that that we're entering into a new Cold War. Perhaps we are not in substance, but the rhetoric is very much along these lines. Mr. Cameron described the events in Algeria as heralding a new era in the British relationship with North Africa. When Sir Malcolm Rifkind, the former Foreign Secretary, referred to North Africa as the soft underbelly of Europe in a Churchillian flourish, Mr. Cameron agreed with him. Today, Hillary Clinton was discussing the attack on the embassy in Benghazi, or the consulate in Benghazi, on the 11th of September last year, and she said that this is a reflection of how the North Africa is now afflicted with Islamist violence. Look at the Republic of Cyprus. It's now becoming encircled by Islamist movements in Libya, in Egypt, in Gaza, in Lebanon, and in Turkey. And in Syria, perhaps. If that is the case, then I would suggest, if I can borrow a phrase lifted from the Cold War and used in the context of Turkey, that the Republic of Cyprus is a bulwark against Islamism. Nothing could be more dangerous than to establish a religiously flavoured, nationally based Turkish Cypriot constituent state in the north and a similarly based constituent state in the south. We need to integrate the Republic of Cyprus and ensure that no area is religiously based, because that, history shows, gives rise to what this American diplomat referred to: violence, bloodshed, terrorism. And looking at it in a positive way, if the Republic of Cyprus can be built as a multi-ethnic democracy under the rule of law, it will act as a precedent for the establishment of genuine democracy, genuine equality, and genuine law in the Eastern Mediterranean basin. That's what I would put to the diplomats before tearing up bicommunalism and bizonalism.
Sorry. So time is moving on. What I'm going to do is take 2 or 3 questions in one go. Start with the gentleman here first, please. Could you say your question, then we'll move on to the gentleman next to you, as it makes it quicker.
Thank you. Professor Coufoudakis has referred to the contrast between the Turks pursuing a consistent policy while the Greek handling has been ridden by contradictions and confusions. One obvious example is the famous high-level agreements of 1977 and 1979. These agreements were violated by Mr. Bektas in 1983 when he declared the so-called state in the occupied territories. In spite of that, our side insists that these agreements bound us in perpetuity. And of course, they refer to Makarios and some other silly explanations. Thank you.
Can you raise your hand to ask a question? Okay. Any more questions, please? Raise your hand. Okay. So I can see you want to ask. Okay. We'll take the lady next to you next, and then we'll answer the 3 or make some comments.
Yes. Is there any truth in the Turkish Cypriot claim that the European Union, when asked by them, they informed them that the European Union would accept any agreement between the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots?
Thank you. Over here, please. One more question in the middle. And then we'll have some comments from the speakers on those 3 questions.
My name is Ellie, and thank you very much to both speakers for addressing these points. It's been a long time coming. So firstly to Dr. Coufoudakis.
Could you speak a little
Can you
louder?
hear me?
I can hear you. My name is Coufoudakis.
Okay, so my first question is to yourself. Last week, Kofi Annan was in London, and he was asked by a young Cypriot girl if what he would change if he could have the chance to do everything again. And he said a big mistake was when Cyprus was admitted to the EU. Now, would you say that having the EU presidency was used to, like, was maximised, can I say, to bring attention to the Cyprus problem? And how do you think? Okay, it's not really a question. Do you understand what I mean? Okay, sorry. So, do you think Cyprus used its position in presidency of the EU to bring light to the situation and to kind of help?
I think the President of Cyprus deliberately didn't. That's my understanding.
Yeah.
He deliberately decided not to, because he wanted Cyprus to be seen to be professional.
Yes.
That question then is whether you agree with that, of course.
Yeah.
Okay, that's...
sorry, I have a question.
Sorry, one more.
To Kyriakides. So you've touched on the kind of narrative, the labels that we use, their side, our side, Greek Cypriot, Turkish Cypriot. I would completely agree with you that it's morally and ethically wrong, and you've laid those reasons out perfectly, but it's also disadvantageous to our cause, in that a common misconception of Cyprus is that it's Greek Cypriots versus Turkish Cypriots. Obviously, we know that it's the Republic of Cyprus versus an occupying force. Don't you think, how do you think we could convince Cypriots and the politicians to change those labels, which would make such a difference in the public eye? On that note, why don't we have Turkish Cypriots in the negotiating table on the side of the Republic of Cyprus? Because they're under our constitution, they're in our republic. And moreover, why don't Cypriot children in the Republic of Cyprus get taught basic Turkish? It's an official language of our country. Thank you.
Okay, do you want to answer those questions?
The gentleman raised the point about European Union's acceptance of the settlement. Yes. If I'm correct, if I remember correctly, what the European Union has said is they will accept a settlement of the Cyprus question provided it's consistent with European Union norms and values, which isn't quite the same thing as some Turkish Cypriots may have alleged. What some Turkish Cypriot nationalists and what Turkey is concerned by is the possibility that refugee organisations and other interested citizens might challenge the legality of any constitutional mechanism that is incompatible with EU law. So they would like the EU treaties to be amended. So they would like, for example, that provision to say the European Union has founded all of those principles, comma, with the exception of, in the context of the Republic of Cyprus. At the moment, they know that the principles are so contrary that they could be challenged in court. And we have cases, I won't bore you with the details, we have cases from both the European Court of Human Rights, which is a non-EU court, and the European Court of Justice, which is the EU court, that confirm you can challenge what politicians do and provisions of law that are incompatible. The other point that I wanted to make on the 1977-79 texts, which have somehow metamorphosed into high-level agreements, because they were referred to as such by the United Nations in the 1990 Security Council resolution. I refer everyone in Cyprus to what Lord Denning said in an English case from the 1970s. That case, I'm paraphrasing here, it concerned English champagne. And the English manufacturers of English champagne said, well, we've been making English champagne for centuries. The English law allows us to make English champagne. And Lord Denning said, but by joining the European Union under the 1972 European Communities Act, European Union law acts as a tidal wave that flows up the estuaries and covers everything in its path that is incompatible with European Union law. And I would just take that very simple principle of English law, which is also part of European Union law, and apply it to the 77-79 agreements. European Union law has washed over those agreements, and they should start afresh. The final point to make is in relation to Evie's point. I didn't have time to go into my traditional attack on the procedure on the Cyprus question. Why should Armenians be excluded from the negotiations? The Annan plan had provisions to do with the Armenians and their educational status, and why were they excluded? What about the 60,000 British citizens who live on the Republic of Cyprus? Why should they be excluded? Why should the refugees in this country be excluded from the process? Why, for example, were the doctors, as I understand it, why were the doctors not consulted over the medical provisions of the Annan Plan and the health service provisions before the Annan Plan? Was the judiciary consulted before the judicial provisions of the Annan Plan were drafted? In modern European democracies, we have what's called consultation. The Scottish government consulted everyone in the United Kingdom before embarking upon its moves towards a referendum. The British government has done likewise. That's what modern European democracies do. And they publish documents, maybe not all of them, but they publish documents and seek views. That model of modern, transparent, liberal democracy has not been applied in Cyprus. And it's not just the process, it's not just the substance that's defective and rotten, the process is rotten as well.
The comments I want to make about the EU. In 1998, the government of Cyprus, when they entered the more serious phase of the negotiations, made a very interesting proposal. It asked Turkish Cypriots to join in the negotiating team for the accession of Cyprus to the EU. Who turned it down? Turkey. Because Turkey insisted that there will be two separate track negotiations, one involving the so-called TRNC and the other one the Republic of Cyprus. That way you legitimize the illegal entity created in 1983 in the occupied areas. So the offers have been made, the offers have been turned down by another side. Now, the case of the Europeans, in many ways, remember, the EU, and I have always been an advocate of the EU has also become a bureaucratic organization, and to a large degree does not want to inherit any more problems than it already has. So if the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots agreed to the Annan plan, they said, okay, we'll accommodate it, as long as it does not really truly contradict principles, a kind of vague statement in that Article 10. So, and on top of that, they have British diplomacy and American diplomacy trying to keep the EU off the negotiations in Cyprus. Look at what happened when we were in the final stages of the Annan Plan in 2004. The only thing the United States, Britain and Turkey agreed to was for the EU to have an observer in the Bergenstock talks for the sake of blessing whatever agreement Kofi Annan was going to impose at Bergenstock on the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots. So that is reality. And they never wanted the EU to get actively involved for the very simple reason because they knew that if the EU got involved, there are the principles that Klearchos talked about, built into the EU treaties that would make totally incompatible those kinds of schemes that Kofi Annan and his successors are trying to put on the table. That's why. Let me close with a final comment that will show you the funny things that happen in international politics. We all talk about how Israel and Cyprus today are on the same side of the fence. Well, that has not always been the case, because from the 1990s on to about 2010, Turkey and Israel had a very, very close political, economic, and military relationship, as you all very well know. Then Turkey made the switch, we had the Marmara incident, etc. In 2004, I was in Cyprus, and I was involved very much in the background of negotiations and stuff. We had a delegation that came from Israel to do propaganda on behalf of the Annan Plan. Andreas Theophanous, a colleague of mine in Cyprus, and I were in the forefront of the fight against the Annan Plan. So the delegation asked to meet with us to explain to us why we should moderate our position and not oppose the Annan Plan. We had a lengthy meeting in our offices at the University of Nicosia. They failed to convince us, and then another day they invited us to a lunch downtown in the very center of Nicosia, right before Lydra Palace, the Lydra Palace crossing. And it was an inconclusive meeting, it got very lively, and at one point or another I turned around and I told my Israeli colleagues, okay, if you're so much in favor of the Annan Plan, you know, you also have a problem. Why don't you give it to the Palestinians? Well, I can tell you one thing. Our lunch ended very abruptly that day.
Okay, we'll take two. That's fine.
Why don't we capitalize on the haram? Okay, who knows here about the haram teke in Lankan? Everybody knows about it. But the importance of this place, you said rightly, we don't want the Cyprus to be the North Muslim and the South Greek Orthodox. But this one is supposed to be the fourth place in the world for Muslim people. Mecca, Medina, Jerusalem, and this place. We protected it. I mean, our churches suffered, and we know that they ended up with mosaics everywhere, all over the world. And we protected this place. This is something we have to put on the table, on the negotiations. It's a strong point, and I'm sure the Americans and other people who are not aware of it will appreciate that point.
Just look in your own time, look up what is going on in relation to the funding of Islamist movements in the region, because it is quite worrying. The Turkish Cypriots were traditionally Turkish Cypriots. The Turkish government is now repeatedly referring to them as Muslim Turkish Cypriots and emphasising their connection to their religion. If you go onto the website, for example, of the Turkish ministry, or if you read Dr. Davutoglu's book, they are referred to as Muslim Turkish Cypriots. And this is a reflection of the broader the growth of Islamism in the region. We need to embrace Islam as part of the traditional architecture of the island of Cyprus, but what we are seeing is a set of developments in the island and in the region which are out of kilter with the traditional approach. Just one last point about the religious dimension. Some of I've been reading about the new settlements of Jews on the island of Cyprus, and one or two of the Jewish commentators have made a very interesting point. They don't refer to the settlement of Cyprus by Jews in a migratory sense. They refer to the return of Jews to the island of Cyprus 2,000 years after they were expelled by the Romans. And indeed, the Romans imposed the original Annan plan on Cyprus, because when they expelled the Jews from Cyprus, they imposed a ban on their return.
The one thing that I can tell you about the mosques, I've been going to occupied areas of Cyprus since the spring of 1976. Indeed, the growth of the mosques is incredible, and it's not only funded by Turkey, it's funded by Saudi money. And one particular person who is the head of the Turkic Studies program in Oregon is a Turkish Cypriot, whose family and he himself were persecuted and basically ran out of Cyprus because he exposed a lot of the funding from Saudi Arabia to the religious schools and also to the building of mosques and things like that. So it is not just what Mr. Erdogan is doing right now with his own Islamic fundamentalist philosophy, it's the money that is coming also from Saudi Arabia.
And this is my fear with some of the new migrants and refugees that are arriving in Cyprus, because if we don't integrate them into society, we will have the equivalent of the London Underground bombings in Cyprus, because some of these new migrants and refugees are Syrian or from Afghanistan or from Iraq. They need to be integrated and they by all means allowed to keep their faith, but they shouldn't be sucked into the Islamism that's penetrating the region. I'm very worried about that. No one's talking about it, but it is a feature of the Cyprus question that needs to be addressed before it is too late.
Can I take, it's getting late, so what I'd like to do is take the last 2 or 3 questions in a row, and then we've got drinks afterwards. I mean, how many questions have we got? How many people want to ask questions? Okay, let's make them all quick. We've got 1, lay there, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, we'll start here, Maliki. And we'll have all those 5. Keep your hands ready. Can you ask questions as quickly as possible? It's getting late.
I'd like your comments, please, on why President Christofias continuously says that unless we go for Bizonal, Bicommunalism, that Cyprus will be divided. And really, as a follow-up on that, who is Cyprus's Martin Luther King? Who is that person who's going to stand on the podium, put his neck on the line, and take our country forward?
Thank you. Next question, please. Hands up. The gentleman's there closest, please. Can we have this question next, please?
I think there was a missing of a point earlier. The lady, I think, asked about the Teke Larnaca. I think she's trying to point out that we respect and we have not done no damage to the cultural fourth most important Islamic, shall we say, shrine in Cyprus, whereas the Turks and Turkey and the rest of them, Saudi Arabia, they're destroying our culture and also stealing everything and exporting it. I think we have not heard from any politician. We have never seen anything on the media.
In Cyprus are quite too frightened to rock the boat.
And another issue which I picked up on was we were asked a question about what are we seeing on Greek and Cyprus television. We're being bombarded continuously with the Holocaust. They're indoctrinating, making us feel sorry for the Israelis. Nobody's indoctrinating the Israelis to understand what they're doing to the Palestinians. And what is being done to us is wrong. That comparison really hurts me as a scholar of human rights. And I think Olympias knows I've got a website on human rights, followed by thousands of people worldwide. I'm really concerned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next question. As you're sitting there, the lady here, please. And then we'll have a gentleman in the back.
Thank you. A very quick question. The application of rule of law implies that meritocracy also has an effect on meritocracy. In your view, how ready is the Greek Cypriot community for the application of true meritocracy, even if that means that second-generation immigrant becomes, I mean, can we have an Obama in Cyprus anytime soon, or anybody?
The law.
How ready is society to accept that? Because you're proposing something that society has to accept. Are they ready?
Was the gentleman back? And I think that's probably going to be it for tonight. Is there anyone else?
Good evening. My name is Rector. I'm a refugee from Cyprus. I was 5 years old when the war happened. In a solution Bizonal, Bicommunal, they guarantee that me and the other 200,000 refugees are going to go back to their homes, where our ancestors, thousands of years, they were over there living in our houses, and they guarantee we're going to go back and live there. And another thing you have to keep in mind, Ahmed Davutoğlu, in his book he wrote Strategiko Varus, he said, even if it wasn't any Turkish Cypriot in Cyprus, we would create one, so we can claim a Turkish state in Cyprus. And they won't stop to the Bizonal Federation of Turkish. If you look them up there, the only island is stopping to come to the Mediterranean is Cyprus underneath. And if they get the whole of Cyprus, then they come to the Mediterranean. Thank you.
Thank you. Final question. Can you put your hand up if you really wanted to ask a question? The lady here at the front there with the final question, right?
What I would like to ask...
Can you put the microphone closer, please?
The question of rule of law, you said so beautifully earlier on, and in other many speeches when we've been together, and you have always mentioned it about the rule of law. And what I see every day, no one is practicing the rule of law. So would there be any stronger voice that the rule of law would make it acceptable and workable?
You're basically saying that effectively we're arguing about the rule of law and preserving the concepts and the principles. But is Cyprus ready for it? I think it's similar to the question asked earlier.
Yes, the lady said a similar question. Yes.
Should we start? Thank you very much. I think that's finished. Thank you very much. I think the first question related to President Christofias, and I think something like the likelihood of him changing and adopting a different approach. The experience I've had as a Lobby for Cyprus member for over 20 years is that every time we talk to our leadership, we mention the concerns we've got, and can't we start afresh? And even after 2004, as you quite rightly said, we had the opportunity. They say, oh my God, don't be stupid. We lack all credibility in front of the UN and the Americans and the British. Don't be stupid. How could we possibly do that? How can we say we don't want Bizonal? They don't even know half the time, sometimes, what it exactly means. But so,
time 2 minutes.
Can we answer first that question there? What do we say to President Christofias? Who
is the Martin Luther King?
Yeah, that's the first question. Let me just go through the questions. The other questions really were cultural, I think, about Cyprus, rule of law and meritocracy. I think that was it, really. So really, is Cyprus ready for a change in the approach we're discussing? Because what we at Lobby want to do is not just talk about the issues, is talk about our plan. And Nick Coufoudakis said, why can't we do that? And after 2004, we had the opportunity, because the Annan plan said, if it's not agreed by the Greek Cypriots, it's null and void. And the problem we have as Cypriots is we're not very good at marketing ourselves. No one ever knows really what we think. And that's something else we can talk about another time. But
I'll be very cynical, because you mentioned about meritocracy. Meritocracy begins at home. And so far we have the parties ruling and pulling the strings. We don't have meritocracy. You know that in Cyprus better than I do. So meritocracy should begin at home, doing the day-to-day chores, rather than whose connections you have that are going to give you a job in the public sector, which is another silly concept. Every graduate of the university seeks a public job thanks to some political connection or another. That's not merit.
Yes.
So merit begins at home before we start putting it at a much broader level, okay? And I'm Cypriot at heart, I'm not of Cypriot origin. I have worked for Cyprus, but that hurts me when I see that on a day-to-day basis. Cyprus, and to even a greater extent, Greece, where I'm working right now, suffers from a major leadership vacuum.
Yes.
And the sooner we realize the leadership vacuum existing in Nicosia and in Athens, we're going to be much better off starting to think about what that means for the future of both countries. Because the future of Cypriot Hellenism affects the future of Hellenism in general and Greece in particular. And I'll close with one comment. Christofias lately has been saying, Bizonal or partition? Come on. We have partition right now. And anybody who has read what the proposals for the Bizonal provide, Bizonal bicommunal provide, they legalize, they formalize the partition. So we have to stop playing the rhetorical games and tell people what the reality of what they're confronted with. That's all. I'm cynical, I'm tired, I'm 75 years old, I've been too long around this issue, I'm not a Cypriot, I'm still going to fight against the Annan plan or its resurrection, but there has to be a young generation to follow on this thing and stick to the principles of change, social and political change within the principles of the rule of law.
All I would add to that is, first of all, with Aligi's question, I'm reminded of Enoch Powell's observation that all political careers end in failure. President Christofias' judgment is not one that I would want to rely on with a view to settling the Cyprus question. He was promised by The Economist the Nobel Peace Prize back in 2008, and regrettably politicians have a tendency to go after short-term glory. Martin Luther King earned the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964, but in 1973, do you know who earned the Nobel Peace Prize? Dr. Kissinger. The gentleman was mentioned the churches. I was reminded by talking about archbishops. Have a look at the speeches given by the outgoing Archbishop of Canterbury on the fate of Christians in the Middle East. Even this month, a Coptic Orthodox community centre was burnt down. We could well be seeing over the next few years the influx of refugees from the Coptic Christian community from Egypt into Cyprus. We've already seen attacks on the Christians in Syria and elsewhere. This part of the world that the Republic inhabits is highly toxic, and religiously fueled violence is a part of the landscape. The last point I'd make is really concerning the Hillsborough disaster. Do you remember the Hillsborough disaster in the 89? I was at Arsenal on that day, Highbury, and my mother heard about the Hillsborough disaster and she thought I was at Hillsborough, whereas I was at Highbury. And at the time, everyone thought that the cause of the death of all of those football fans was their own activities. And the police created this tapestry of lies that the alleged hooligans were responsible and that they were clean. It took, 22 years for an official inquiry to uncover the truth, the cover-ups, the injustice that had been implemented on the dead people and their families. Their families campaigned for justice. It took them 22 years of relentless campaigning, and eventually the truth came out. The police were responsible for the Hillsborough disaster. It wasn't the victims, and it certainly wasn't the families who had been the victims of injustice. And the cardinal lesson of the Hillsborough inquiry is that if you have the truth, the law, and justice on your side, you must not give in, especially in the face of powerful people. You must stick to your principles, and eventually, even if you have to wait decades, as in the case of the Hillsborough families, justice will eventually prevail.
Just some concluding remarks. I think you'll all agree with me that we've been very fortunate tonight. We have two excellent speakers. They've dealt with the question head-on about Bizonality, Bicommunalism, and we at Lobby do deal with issues head-on, and we don't just deal in academia and talk about the issues. We want to talk about the way forward, and you have been given ideas about the way forward, which are pretty common sense to me, to be honest. And really what we have to battle with is our leadership on the islands mostly, and we need to use these ideas, these debates, and show them there are fresh ideas, there are other approaches which have value, and the way we're going is really going into a dead end when I look at it. So what I'd like you to do is, in the usual fashion, firstly to thank Professor Coufoudakis for coming all the way here from Cyprus. From Athens, and you know, I personally have learned a huge amount, and it's been entertaining as well as educational. Thank you to Dr. Klearchos for very inspirational as well. It's an interesting talk. Can I say, we at Lobby for Cyprus are volunteers. We're all volunteers. We spent hours on setting up seminars. Everyone at the back here has been here for hours. We need your support. Please put your name down if you can. Give us your email addresses. Buy some of the books. Tell your friends, your colleagues about us. Without support, without the community behind us, discussing the issues, and the one thing we don't do well, in my view, and it's going on for some of the questions here, we don't actually sell ourselves. In our position, we don't explain what's happened. We're too frightened, some of us, for some reason, particularly our leadership. And that's what we at Lobby for Cyprus have been doing for 20 years. Finally, most importantly, there are drinks. Please stay behind and join us and have a drink on us. And thank you again very much for attending tonight's Lawyers Research Seminar. Thank you.
Thank you.